Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about the importance of vitamin D and how it plays a role with regard to weight loss and weight loss resistance. I think most of us know that vitamin D plays a crucial role in bone strengthening, fighting depression, boosting immunity. However, what research has now shown over several decades, and again, thousands of studies have been done on this, is that the lack of vitamin D actually does play a role in what your weight looks like on the scale. Like as I said, unlike most vitamins, vitamin D can actually be manufactured in the body. And most of how that is accomplished is by being exposed to sunlight. Now, the issue, of course, with that is that most of us don't get adequate levels of sunlight just due to where we live and also our lifestyle choices. But the key thing to understand is that every cell in your body needs vitamin D for it to function correctly, even those fat cells that we really don't want. There are special receptors specifically for vitamin D that are activated and will burn fat or will simply store it based on the levels of vitamin D and how much your body is actually hearing, or the cell membrane, how much of that vitamin D is binding to those receptors. So it's really, really important to understand that vitamin D does play a role in revving up your body's ability to burn fat. Now, in addition to that, vitamin D does have an effect on the brain. There are receptors in the brain which do help to control hunger and cravings. So again, it's really, really important to understand that. It also will pump up the level of production of serotonin, which is the mood elevating hormone. And then finally, vitamin D also optimizes your body's ability to absorb other really important weight loss nutrients, especially calcium. And so just keep in mind that when your body sees a lack of calcium, it can experience up to a 5-fold increase in the fatty acid synthase, an enzyme that does convert calories into fat. So again, really, really important micronutrient and vitamin that needs to be addressed. Now, when we look at sources of vitamin D, specifically, as my recommendation, it's pretty limited in terms of foods because most of the foods that are suggested for consuming to increase your vitamin D levels, I'm not a big fan of for many reasons. But here's the list of foods that I think are fine and are good to consume. So things like fatty fish. Again, salmon is one of the fishes that comes to mind. That's a good source. But again, the issue with salmon is that there's mercury and other heavy metal exposures. So again, while fatty fish is by far a good source of vitamin D, it definitely brings other challenges, of course, because of the environment in which these fish live. Beef liver is another great source of vitamin D. Grass-fed cheese, eggs as well, specifically the yolks. Believe it or not, shiitake mushrooms are quite high in vitamin D, and then of course grass-fed milk. Now, for some of you, obviously, the dairy does pose a problem just because of the issue of either lactose intolerance or some other allergy to dairy. So it becomes quite challenging from a dietary standpoint to get the vitamin D, especially like I said, if we're living in the northern hemisphere of the globe, we don't get enough sun exposure, so we're not getting it naturally produced, and of course the food options, I should say, become quite limited for vitamin D. So essentially what that does is it puts us in a position where we're kind of forced to supplement, and this is one of the ones that I use. And so with regard to supplementation, liquid is definitely best because your body absorbs it and utilizes it better. It's easier on the stomach. And so when looking at a vitamin like D, specifically a liquid D, you want to make sure that it's a D3. And also in addition to that, you want to make sure that the dropper size is no less than 2,500 IU. Now, for those of you in Canada, that makes it difficult because the maximum dose is 1,000 IU. But for the folks in the U.S. and other parts of the world, you should be able to have or get access to a product that has at least that much. And the reason that's important is that depending on your levels, which really takes us to the next point on the slide here, is that When we look at reference ranges on a normal lab, the reference range is anywhere between 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. And most, believe it or not, lots of people, quite a high percentage, over 70%, they say, based on the research I've read, is sub 30. So of course, if you're sub 30, you're in real serious, you're in hot water, essentially, when it comes to vitamin D. And doctors will say, anything over 30 is fine. But again, remember, there's a reference range, which is an average, and then there's optimal range. Optimal range is 60 to 90 nanograms per milliliter. So most people aren't anywhere close to those numbers. And the only way you know where you are is to do a test. And that's what this blood test is. It's the 25-hydroxy vitamin D, or 25-OHD. This is a test any doctor can order. You can self-order this test. In fact, one of the resources I recommend to people is to go to directlabs.com. And I just looked at it before I did this video. It's a $45 charge. So if it's so easy. You go online, you purchase it, it produces a requisition form, you print it out, you take it to the lab. Locally, they do the draw, they measure your numbers, they post it that same day. So it's a really simple test to have done. It's pretty inexpensive. And so when you're using vitamin D therapeutically to increase your doses, so let's just say you're sub 60, okay? Optimal range, I'm telling you, is for cell function and for brain function and for all the things that we're talking about as it relates to vitamin D, should be between 60 to 90. So let's just say you're at 25. You probably want to start out with a higher dose. I, generally speaking, and again, this is not designed for everyone, so please don't take this literally. It's important that we have a private conversation about your specific situation and levels. But on average, I'm going to suggest somewhere around 10,000 IU for a period of 90 to 180 days, again, depending on how low your levels are. But then I would definitely recommend that you get retested to make sure that we're hitting those levels. And then once you hit those levels, then we can talk about a maintenance dose. Anywhere between 3 to 5,000 IU, generally speaking, is enough to maintain those levels. Now, let's just sort of throw this out there. Many times you're going to get some type of feedback from a primary care doctor or some other healthcare provider that if you have doses that are in excess, or that you can overdose and you can have vitamin D toxicity by taking high doses of vitamin D. Well, in order for you to be toxic, you have to hit 150 nanograms per milliliter or more. It's almost virtually impossible to go beyond those numbers, especially if you're using the dose that I'm recommending. So don't be fearful that you're going to run into a vitamin D toxicity, especially if you take the mindset of, I'm going to retest in 90 to 180 days to see where my levels are at. So you follow that principle, then you definitely are going to be fine, and you'll see where you're at, and then you'll make the adjustments to make sure that you're taking the right or adequate levels of vitamin D to maintain your adequate levels. So bottom line is this: vitamin D is very important in fat metabolism. It's really important that you consider this when trying to lose weight. This is something that we have seen consistently across the board with people that struggle with weight loss. And if you have other conditions, things like Hashimoto's or various other autoimmune disease, many times you'll see that the vitamin D levels are really, really low and feed, believe it or not, these conditions. So it's in your best interest to really take a closer look at where you're at in terms of your vitamin D levels. And then once you know objectively, like anything I ever talk about, you want to know objectively where you're at, then you make, or I can assist in giving you proper recommendations on what to do for how long, and then we retest. I hope this video has provided you with some good information, and if you have any questions, you know where to reach me.